They laughed over the wreck of a burned-out Sherman and called it a tin can. Minutes later, artillery rained down on their own position, called in from another Sherman still alive, using its FM radio. From Nancy, 1944, the lesson was written in fire. It wasn't the refined Panther that ruled the field, but the Sherman system. Numbers, repair speed, communication. When they heard that sound, they knew death was coming. September 12, 1944, 0640. Outskirts of Nancy, Lorraine, France. The morning fog hangs low over the Moselle Valley, clinging to the hedgerows like smoke that refuses to die. The air reeks of wet diesel and scorched paint. On a ridge above the ruined village of Aracourt, 3 colonels from Panzer Division stand beside the blackened carcass of an American Sherman. The armor is warped. The White Star blistered and peeling. Colonel Wilhelm Bayer, gloves smeared with soot, kicks the twisted track and laughs. Amerikanische Konservenbuchse, he mutters. American tin can. His aide laughs with him. To them, this wreck proves the myth of German superiority. Their new Panther tanks with high-velocity 75mm guns and sloped armor are masterpieces, elegant, precise, invincible. Below them, the fields are strewn with metal corpses, German and American alike, but the colonels see only what feeds their pride. They build fast, Bayer says, but they die faster. A faint engine hum drifts through the mist. The low, steady growl of Shermans regrouping somewhere beyond the hedgerows. They ignore it. In their minds, mass can never defeat craftsmanship. One colonel lights a cigar. The match flares orange against the gray fog. "They'll come again," he says, "and we'll burn them again." Then comes the sudden burst of radio static, too close, too organized. Seconds later, the rising whistle that freezes every veteran of the Western Front. "Deckung!" someone yells. The ridge vanishes in thunder. The first shell lands short. The second finds its mark. The cigar drops into the mud as fire roars upward. Half a mile away, a forward observer in a surviving Sherman watches through binoculars. His voice is calm over the FM radio. "On target. Adjust fire. 50 meters left." In minutes, the laughter is gone. Only smoke and silence remain. The guns fall quiet. The fog thins. Shermans roll forward in clean formation, radios crackling with short, precise orders. They had called them tin coffins, fragile, cheap, expendable. But that morning, outside Nancy, the German officers learned the first rule of modern war. The side that talks faster kills faster. Lorraine, France, September 1944. The laugh at Nancy. The myth was dying, not by armor thickness, but by the arithmetic of industry. Before Lorraine, before the fog and the fire, the myth had already taken root, a story told in every German officer's mess, in every tank yard from Normandy to the Rhine. The Americans, they said, built toys, not tanks. "The Sherman," sneered one Panzer commander, "is a coffin for 5 men." The line spread through field reports, propaganda broadcasts, and late-night drinking tables, each repetition carving the insult deeper into German confidence. At first, even American crews half believed it. They saw how easily a Panther's long 75mm could punch through a Sherman's frontal armor. They watched comrades vanish in seconds when a hit turned their tank into a furnace. To the men inside, it was easy to think the enemy had built perfection. But the truth was never about perfection. It was about momentum. German design philosophy worshipped the exceptional, the precision machine, the ideal ratio of speed, armor, and firepower. The Panther was an engineer's dream, a commander's prize, and a mechanic's nightmare. Every tank was slightly different. Every repair required time, tools, and skilled labor. Germany could build brilliance, but it could not build enough of it. The Americans followed a different god. They built for replacement. Every Sherman, whether rolled out of Detroit, Chicago, or Cleveland, could trade parts with any other. The gearboxes, engines, and radios were standard. The tools to fix them fit in a duffel bag. A tank could be wrecked in the morning and back in the fight by sunset. The Sherman wasn't the best tank. It was the most available one. In 1943, German officers mocked the Sherman's shape, calling its rounded turret the teapot. In truth, that cast design saved thousands of man-hours in welding and allowed mass production without specialized steelwork. By mid-1944, the Allies were landing tanks faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy them. For every Panther that left a factory floor, 8 Shermans rolled off American lines. The colonels in Lorraine didn't see those numbers when they laughed at the burned wreck. They saw a single machine, not the system behind it. They didn't see the freighters crossing the Atlantic, the convoys from New York, the repair depots outside Cherbourg, or the Red Ball Express roaring through the French countryside day and night. Inside that invisible machine lay the true secret of American armor, the network, not the vehicle. Every Sherman was a node in a vast equation of fuel, radio, and replacement. To break the tank, you had to break the system. And by the fall of 1944, no German unit could. They thought they were fighting steel against steel. In reality, it was factory against factory, nation against clock. The Panther was a masterpiece, but war had no patience for masterpieces. By the time the Panzer divisions understood that truth, the fields of France were already filling with the evidence. In 1940, while Germany was rolling across Europe, American industry was still making sedans, refrigerators, and farm tractors. When the War Department realized it needed an army that could move, it didn't turn to military geniuses, it turned to factory foremen. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department approached Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors with a simple order: build tanks as if they were cars. Standardize everything. Produce without pause. At the heart of this transformation stood the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant, built from the ground up in 1941. It wasn't a workshop, it was a city of metal. By 1943, it ran 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Sparks lit the night sky as welding crews rotated like clock hands. Each week, hundreds of new Shermans rolled off the line. The process was ruthless in its efficiency. No luxury engineering, no perfectionism, just relentless repetition. The Panther, by contrast, came from a different universe. Born in late 1942 as Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34, it demanded precision machining, rare steel, and delicate gear systems that had to be aligned by hand. The average Panther required 5 times the labor hours of a Sherman. A single missing component could delay completion for days. Germany built machines of art. America built machines of habit. Every piece of the Sherman was interchangeable. A damaged tank could be stripped in minutes and refitted with parts scavenged from another. Engines were shared with aircraft and trucks. Radios were identical across divisions, meaning any tank could talk to any other unit: infantry, artillery, even aircraft. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a node in a continent-wide network. Behind that network was something new in warfare: the industrial conveyor of destruction. Rail cars carried tanks to East Coast ports. Freighters hauled them across the Atlantic, and engineers unloaded them onto French soil with cranes and bulldozers that never stopped. For every Sherman knocked out, 2 more were already on the way. The math of industry became the math of war. By summer 1944, the United States was producing a Sherman every 38 minutes. Germany, crippled by bombing and fuel shortages, needed up to 2 weeks to finish a single Panther. By the time a German unit received its new tanks, the battlefront had already shifted. Patton understood this better than anyone. His doctrine was simple: Keep 'em moving. He didn't need perfect tanks. He needed tanks that could fight today, be repaired tonight, and fight again tomorrow. His columns advanced on gasoline and replacement parts as much as courage. The Sherman was never meant to win duels. It was meant to win campaigns. In the background of every battle film from Europe, you can almost hear the heartbeat of Detroit. The rhythmic hammer of machines, the hiss of molten steel, the rumble of trains carrying fresh armor to the ports. It was a sound the Germans never heard in their own homeland after 1943. Allied bombers had silenced their factories, while American ones roared louder than ever. The Panther might have been born in the mind of an engineer. The Sherman was born on the assembly line. One was a weapon. The other was a process. And in total war, process beats perfection every time. Wars are won by equations, not adjectives. By 1944, the math of destruction was already tilting beyond recovery for Germany. America had turned its entire economy into an algorithm of steel, fuel, and manpower, and the results were merciless. The numbers tell the story better than any boast. The United States produced 49,234 Shermans between 1942 and 1945. That's one every 38 minutes, day and night. Germany managed barely 6,000 Panthers, and of those, fewer than half were combat-ready at any given time. For every Panther that rolled out of a factory in Germany, 8 Shermans thundered down from American assembly lines. The cost gap was brutal. Each Panther demanded the work of skilled machinists and rare alloys worth nearly $120,000 per unit. A Sherman cost about $35,000, cheap enough that losing one was simply part of the calculation. When a Panther burned, it crippled the workshop that built it. When a Sherman burned, the next ship already carried its replacement. Fuel was the next killer number. The American supply system fed an army that consumed 2 million gallons a day, pumped through pipelines, rail, and the Red Ball Express. Germany's panzers ran on rail delays, horse carts, and prayer. The farther they advanced, the emptier their tanks became. Every German offensive bled momentum through logistics the math could not support. Availability was the unseen statistic that decided entire campaigns. On the Western Front, American tank readiness averaged 85%. For the Panthers, it was barely 40%. Each breakdown consumed 10 mechanics, a day of labor and fuel that no one could spare. The Panther's elegance became its curse, too fine for the dirt and chaos of real war. Even ammunition became a ratio. The Americans fired 5 shells for every one the Germans could supply. That meant more suppression, more destruction, more hours of contact. War had become a production line, not a duel. The numbers didn't just favor the Allies, they crushed the very logic of German warfare. The Wehrmacht had been built for short, brilliant campaigns. America had prepared for an infinite one. By late 1944, the front was a living spreadsheet of attrition. Every time a Panther fired a shot, somewhere behind it a Sherman was already being repaired, replaced, or shipped. In October of that year, Allied intelligence compiled a report comparing monthly output. U.S. armor production, 2,300 tanks. German armor production, 350. That's not a contest. That's a countdown. The Panthers still killed. On the battlefield, a single hit could turn a Sherman into a fireball. But the arithmetic refused to bend. When the smoke cleared, there were always more Shermans, more crews, more fuel. Not quality versus quality, but quality versus quantity and uptime. And in that equation, the Panther was already obsolete. By the fall of 1944, the Germans still laughed at American toys. They didn't realize the joke had already ended, and the punchline was production. September 1944, Lorraine, France. The battlefield near Aracourt is a patchwork of fog, mud, and shattered villages. It's here that German theory collides with American math. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, fresh from Germany, move west with nearly 200 Panthers and Panzer IVs. Their mission: cut through Patton's Third Army and reclaim Nancy. The plan is textbook blitzkrieg: strike fast, isolate, destroy. The Germans are confident. They believe their Panthers will sweep aside the fragile Shermans like leaves in a storm. But war doesn't wait for belief. On the morning of September 19th, the fog rolls in thick as wool. Visibility drops to 50 yards. The Germans can barely see their own treads. They advance blind through the mist, their radios patchy, their maps outdated. Across the field, Major Creighton Abrams of the U.S. 37th Tank Battalion orders his Shermans to hold fire until they can see the enemy's silhouettes. The Americans wait in silence, engines idling low. Their FM radios keep every platoon in tight communication. They know where each unit is, what each gun covers, and how close the artillery net sits behind them. Then, the first shadows appear. Panthers moving in single file. The fog distorts the sound of their engines, turning them into a low metallic growl. Abrams gives a single word over the net. Now! Sherman turrets swing. The valley erupts. American 75mm shells hammer the lead Panthers, not from the front but from the flanks, where the armor is thin. The first column stalls. The second hesitates. Confusion ripples through the German ranks as their radios fail to coordinate the counterattack. Abrams calls for artillery support, not by runner or flare, but through the same FM network linking tank to tank. Within 5 minutes, American guns zero in. The fog glows orange with the flashes of impact. German formation breaks down. Panthers turn to retreat, only to bog down in the mud. By the afternoon, air support joins the equation. P-47 Thunderbolts dive through the thinning clouds, dropping 500-pound bombs on clusters of German armor. To the Panthers, it feels like the sky itself has joined the enemy. For 10 days, the fighting around Aracourt grinds on. The Germans push again and again, each time believing the weather, the terrain, or luck will shift in their favor. Each time, the Shermans respond with the same pattern: coordination, radio precision, and relentless repair. A tank knocked out at dawn is back in action by dusk. Crews rotate. Mechanics work in shifts under the rain. The American lines bend but never break. By September 29th, the outcome is undeniable. The Germans have lost 285 tanks, more than they can replace in a month. The Americans, just 25. The kill ratio has flipped upside down. The myth of the unstoppable Panther dies in the mud of Lorraine. German prisoners later recall their disbelief. "We could see them everywhere," one Panther gunner said. "We thought we had destroyed them all, yet they kept coming." What they didn't understand was that they weren't fighting tanks anymore. They were fighting a system that never slept. Patton's staff would later summarize Aracourt in one sentence: "It wasn't a victory of armor, but of organization." The battle proved the point that the burned ridge outside Nancy had only hinted at, that radios, supply lines, and standardized machines could do what the most sophisticated weapon could not. At Aracourt, the Panthers met not just the Shermans, but the industrial heartbeat of America, and it beat them into silence. Every battle has an aftermath, but for Germany in late 1944, every loss created a domino line that couldn't be stopped. The Panthers' strength on paper turned into weakness in motion. Each time one broke down or burned, it pulled a dozen men and tons of fuel out of circulation. The numbers no longer described a war, they described a collapse. By October, the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades that had attacked at Aracourt barely existed. Of the hundreds of Panthers sent west, fewer than 50 could move under their own power. The rest sat crippled. Transmission failures, cracked suspensions, jammed turrets. In reports back to Berlin, the word Werkstatt, workshop, appeared more often than front. Germany's armored divisions were dissolving in place. Each Panther required 10 mechanics and at least 2 trucks to tow and repair. That meant fuel that Germany didn't have. By the autumn of 1944, the average tank unit received less than a third of its required fuel allotment. What wasn't destroyed by Allied bombing had to be hauled on horse-drawn wagons. Entire companies went idle, waiting for fuel that would never arrive. The Sherman, by contrast, lived inside a repair loop measured in hours. A disabled tank was pulled back, stripped, refitted, and returned before the Germans could even register the kill. Spare engines were stacked like bread loaves in field depots. Welding rigs ran day and night under canvas tents. American ordnance units learned to rebuild an entire tank battalion faster than German factories could produce one. Each Panther that failed became a ghost on the map, counted in plans but absent on the ground. Commanders ordered counterattacks that never materialized because the machines could no longer move. Officers like Wilhelm Bayer wrote in their field journals, "We are fighting on paper, not in steel." The chain reaction spread beyond the battlefield. Fewer tanks meant fewer transports, fewer escorts, fewer routes. When Panthers burned, so did their supply lines. By November, some German divisions operated with fewer than a dozen running tanks. It wasn't a defeat by battle, it was a defeat by arithmetic. Every machine that failed forced another to compensate. Every destroyed Panther consumed time, manpower, and morale. Every replacement request arrived to factories already starving for materials. The entire system folded in on itself, like a machine running backward. A German staff officer would later write, "Our tanks were beautiful. They died beautifully." But beauty was irrelevant to the math of war. The Americans didn't need beauty. They needed function, and function multiplied. The collapse of the German armored arm wasn't announced in one great battle or surrender. It was measured in the silence of stalled engines, in the black smoke of tanks abandoned for lack of fuel, in the empty rail yards where replacements never arrived. By the winter of 1944, the arithmetic was absolute. For every Panther Germany lost, America could field 10 Shermans. The war had turned into a calculator, and the numbers were merciless. December 1944. The Ardennes. The German army launches its last great gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. A blizzard howls through the forests as the 5th and 6th Panzer armies drive west toward the Meuse. Among them roll hundreds of Panthers, the supposed kings of European armor, their tracks grinding through frozen mud and snow. The Germans call it Wacht am Rhein. The Americans call it impossible weather for tanks. But the cold becomes an enemy no engineer can outthink. The Panther's engines choke on thickened oil. Diesel turns to sludge in the lines. Hydraulic fluid freezes solid in the turrets. The powerful Maybach engines, so carefully tuned, refuse to start. Mechanics heat them with torches just to crank them once, burning through the last of their precious fuel. For every Panther that moves, 2 stand still, silent, encased in frost. On the other side of the line, Patton's Third Army moves north. His Shermans run smoother than expected, their standardized lubricants designed for both desert heat and European winter. The Red Ball Express delivers drums of fuel and oil non-stop from depots in France, convoys snaking through the snow under blackout lights. What Germany calls an operation, the Americans call a schedule. By December 22nd, as German forces close around the crossroads town of Bastogne, their supply situation collapses. Tank commanders radio for fuel and receive silence. Convoys are ambushed, bridges bombed, roads clogged with wrecks. Even when German units break through, they run dry within hours. Some Panthers are abandoned intact, engines cold, crews forced to flee on foot. One German officer writes, We had tanks without gasoline, guns without shells, soldiers without sleep. Meanwhile, Patton's columns sliced north at record speed, over 100 miles in freezing rain and ice. The Shermans advanced day and night, headlights blacked out, guided by radio beacons and precise road maps printed in Detroit months earlier. When they hit the German flank, they hit with math. Fuel in, tanks out, constant motion. A scene unfolds outside Sherman. A panther sits dead on the roadside, half buried in snow. Its tracks are stiff with ice. Across the valley, a column of Shermans roars past, engines steady, exhaust glowing orange in the cold night. The contrast is visual and fatal, one army frozen by engineering perfection, the other warmed by logistical excess. Within 2 weeks, the bulge shrinks. German momentum dies with every unstarted engine. Patton's armor links with the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, sealing the encirclement. What Hitler had imagined as a strike to split the Allies ends as a mechanical failure on a continental scale. After the battle, Allied recovery teams inspect the wrecks. Many Panthers are found undamaged. No shell holes, no burn marks. They simply stopped working. One American report sums it up coldly. Enemy tanks rendered inoperable by weather and lack of maintenance. The myth of the unstoppable German tank ends here, in the snowdrifts of the Ardennes, surrounded not by fire, but by silence. The war had changed seasons, and the machines that once dominated in summer now froze to death in winter. In the end, the victory at Bastogne wasn't about bravery or even firepower. It was about which army could still move when the temperature fell below zero. Patton's answer came in steel and gasoline. The Panther died from perfection. The Sherman survived from practicality, and in the frozen woods of Belgium, practicality won the war. In the wake of Bastogne, Patton's columns pressed east with a rhythm that defied the calendar. Snow still covered the roads, but the American war machine had found its cadence, an endless cycle of movement, combat, and repair. The Sherman wasn't just a tank, it was a mechanical soldier that could die and be reborn overnight. Behind the front lines, the U.S. Ordnance Maintenance Battalions worked like pit crews in a race with history. Flatbed trucks rolled in loaded with crippled Shermans, busted transmissions, shredded tracks, engines leaking oil. In most armies, that meant weeks of downtime. In Patton's army, it meant 3 hours. A tank would arrive at dawn, its crew blackened with soot and fatigue. Mechanics swarmed over it before the engine even cooled. Cranes lifted power packs out like clockwork. Spare parts came in wooden crates stamped Detroit or Cleveland. The same engine that powered a Sherman could fit a recovery vehicle, a bulldozer, or a generator. Interchangeability, the most boring word in industry, had become the most lethal concept in war. Across the Channel, German mechanics faced a nightmare. No two Panthers were quite the same. A gearbox from one might not fit another. The Maybach HL230 engine was a masterpiece but required precision tools and factory conditions. Replacing it in the field was almost impossible. In winter, even removing the engine deck took hours of frozen labor. At the American depots, by contrast, wrenches clicked like metronomes. Crews ate rations beside the tanks as sparks flew into the night. Every part had a number, every number a place. Men joked that a Sherman could be disassembled and rebuilt faster than a coffee pot. It wasn't far from the truth. One field report recorded an engine swap completed in 3 hours and 20 minutes. Track repairs took 40 minutes. Damaged guns were replaced rather than rebuilt. Each repair team could restore 4 to 6 tanks per shift. The result was staggering. Operational readiness above 80%, even during continuous fighting. To the Germans, this defied logic. They measured strength in kills. The Americans measured it in uptime. A Panther destroyed one Sherman, but while its gun crew celebrated, two more rolled out of the repair loop and returned to the line. The battlefield was replenished faster than it could be depleted. Patton's commanders used that advantage like a weapon. Units reported real-time tank counts over FM radio every evening. Supply officers adjusted convoys by the hour. When a company fell below strength, replacements arrived before dawn. The German staff, meanwhile, struggled to know which units even had running tanks. Paper reports listed battalions that existed only in theory. On the ground, the difference was visible in motion. The Sherman columns looked endless, repaired, refueled, and repainted even as they advanced. Panther units moved like ghosts, sporadic and uncertain, pausing for repairs that never finished. By early 1945, Allied intelligence intercepted a German message from a Panzer regiment commander. "We lose more tanks to the workshop than to the enemy." The statement wasn't metaphor. It was math. When Patton reached the Saar River, his divisions were still at 85% combat strength. Across the river, German divisions barely reached 40. The numbers no longer spoke of victory or defeat. They spoke of who could stay in the fight. The so-called cheap American tanks had done something the Panthers never could. They turned logistics into a weapon. Every wrench, every crate, every radio call was a round fired in a larger war. The war of replacement. 3 hours to fix, 20 minutes to refuel, 10 minutes to redeploy. That was the real firing cycle of the Sherman. By spring 1945, it was clear. Germany's machines fought brilliantly, but America's machines refused to stop fighting. By April 1945, the road to the Rhine was littered with the wreckage of two philosophies. On one side, the remains of German engineering, scorched Panthers with perfect welds and jammed transmissions. On the other, the constant hum of Sherman engines still moving, still fighting, still replaceable. The verdict of the war was visible in metal and mud. The Germans had believed that a war could be won by superiority. Thicker armor, longer barrels, more precision. But World War II was not a duel of machines. It was a duel of systems. The Panther was designed for tactical brilliance. The Sherman was built for operational inevitability. When historians talk about quality versus quantity, they often forget that quantity is a form of quality, if it never stops arriving. A Panther could kill a Sherman at 1,000 yards, but a Sherman could kill a Panther by returning to the field again and again until the enemy's workshop ran dry. In the end, it wasn't the gun that won. It was the schedule. The numbers seal the coffin. In the final months of the war, America fielded over 30,000 operational tanks in Europe, while Germany struggled to keep 1,500 running. Patton's Third Army alone used more fuel in a week than the entire Wehrmacht could supply to its armored units. The German High Command wasn't outmaneuvered. It was outproduced, outrepaired, and outlasted. The myth of the invincible German tank evaporated under that pressure. What began as arrogance, laughter over a burned Sherman near Nancy, ended as disbelief. Crews abandoned Panthers for lack of gas. Commanders ordered retreats that machines couldn't perform. The great beasts of German steel died not by shellfire, but by exhaustion. When the Allies crossed the Rhine, they didn't just invade Germany. They overran its entire industrial illusion. Behind every Sherman stood a factory, a convoy, a mechanic, and a blueprint that could be copied infinitely. Behind every Panther stood scarcity. The final scene writes itself. A single Sherman rumbles down a ruined German road. On both sides lie blackened Panthers, their turrets blown open, their engines cold. The Sherman's paint is scratched, its tracks clattering, but it moves. That movement, not its armor, not its gun, is the proof of victory. The colonels who once laughed at tin coffins were gone. their battalions erased by their own perfectionism. The laughter had turned to silence. It wasn't firepower that buried the Panther. It was the arithmetic of industry, the math that never sleeps. In that silence, the war made its final statement. They laughed at the cheap tank and drowned in a sea of it. The lesson of the Sherman isn't about who built the prettier machine. It's about who built a machine that never stopped moving. Germany tried to win a war with masterpieces. America won it with multiplication. The math of war had spoken, and its voice was steel, gasoline, and radio. From the fields of Lorraine to the frozen roads of Bastogne, from the smoldering Panthers to the endless columns of Shermans, the verdict was clear. In total war, efficiency is deadlier than elegance. The Sherman's true weapon wasn't its gun or armor, it was time. Time to repair. Time to replace. Time to return to battle while the enemy was still waiting for parts. The colonels who laughed at American toys never saw the next wave coming. Factories that would never stop, bombers that never slept, supply chains that outlasted every counterattack. The tank they mocked became the hammer that broke their armies apart. And yet, even as the fires of defeat rose, German engineers were working on something new, something they believed could reverse the equation again. A weapon that flew faster than sound itself. Sleek, silver, unlike anything else in the sky. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first jet fighter. It was fast enough to outrun bombers, armed enough to slice through formation after formation. But it arrived too late. The same math that doomed the Panther would doom the jet. Too few, too late, too fragile to hearse to matter. Next time, we follow that story. How the Me-262 promised salvation but met the same fate as every German miracle weapon, crushed under the weight of numbers. If you believe wars are won by courage or brilliance, the next episode will test that faith. Because in the air, as on the ground, numbers still end illusions. Stay with the channel. Subscribe for The Jet That Came Too Late, and witness how the arithmetic of the air war finished what the tanks began.